Everyone knows the story of Eilean Mor. 3 men, no bodies, no explanation. But what they never told you is that it wasn't the first time. It wasn't even the second. And the organization responsible for keeping those men alive had a filing system specifically designed to make sure you'd never find out. In December 1900, when the relief vessel Hesperus arrived at the Flannan Isles lighthouse off the Scottish coast and found it abandoned, the story broke into public consciousness with a force that still hasn't faded. The overturned chair, the untouched meal, the clock stopped. It became one of the most documented maritime mysteries in history precisely because it could not be quietly contained. Too many witnesses, too many journalists, too much silence where 3 living men should have been. But silence, it turns out, had been gathering along this corridor for 30 years before that. Trinity House is one of the oldest maritime authorities in the world. Chartered in 1514, it held jurisdiction over lighthouses across England, Wales, and beyond, including remote Atlantic outposts where crews of 2 or 3 men were stationed for weeks at a time with no communication to the mainland except scheduled relief boats. When something went wrong at one of those stations, Trinity House was the first body to receive the report. It was also, under Victorian administrative law, the body that determined how that report was categorized. And categorization in that era was everything. A death classified under certain administrative headings bypassed the coroner entirely. No inquest, no jury, no public record that the law required to be kept accessible. The category they used was deceptively mundane. Translated from the bureaucratic language of the period, it designated incidents in which personnel could not be accounted for due to circumstances consistent with voluntary abandonment of post or misadventure beyond jurisdictional reach. What that meant in practice was this: if Trinity House filed a disappearance under that heading, the men were legally treated as having walked away from their jobs. No investigation was mandated. No families had legal standing to demand one. The records were retained internally, classified as administrative rather than mortality documents, and stored accordingly. For decades, they sat in archive collections that researchers were not directed toward, filed under station maintenance logs rather than incident reports. The classification did not hide the records outright. It simply buried them somewhere no one thought to look. What the records show, when examined together for the first time, is a pattern. Between 1870 and 1900, at least 3 lighthouse stations positioned along the northern Atlantic corridor experienced complete crew disappearances that were processed through exactly this mechanism. 3 stations, 3 sets of men, 3 entries in the administrative ledger that legally ceased to be deaths the moment the ink dried. The Flannan Isles disaster in 1900 forced a public reckoning because it could not be absorbed quietly into that system. But the system had already processed what came before it, and Trinity House had 3 decades of practice by the time the Hesperus arrived at an empty lighthouse, and the world started asking questions they were never supposed to ask. The pattern begins not in 1900 with the famous Eilean Mor case, but in 1872 with the crew of Blackrock Skerries light station off the northwestern Irish coast. 3 keepers, no bodies, no distress signal. Trinity House logged the event as an administrative error in staffing continuity, a classification that sounds mundane until you understand what it actually means. Under Victorian maritime law, that designation transferred jurisdictional authority away from local coroners and placed it entirely within Trinity House's internal review process, a process with no public record requirement, a process that could be, and was, closed without findings. That same classification appeared again in 1881, this time attached to a station off the Outer Hebrides, 40 miles southwest of where the Eilean Mor light would later go dark. The keeper and his 2 assistants were found missing during a routine relief visit. The relief crew noted something in their vessel log that never made it into the official report. The station door was locked from the inside. That detail was documented by the relief captain in his personal journal, which his granddaughter preserved and which resurfaced in a Stornoway estate sale in 1994. Trinity House's official file on the 1881 incident contains 4 sentences. 4 sentences for 3 missing men and a door locked from the inside. Then 1888. A station near the Flannan archipelago itself, a smaller unmanned light that had been converted to a manned post just 2 years prior due to an increase in shipping traffic. The quarterly inspection found the logbook filled out through the previous evening, with no anomaly noted, a meal half-eaten, and the exterior lamp mechanism wound and ready for operation. The inspector's original handwritten report described the scene as, quote, "domestic in every detail save the absence of its occupants." That phrase was struck from the typed official submission. The handwritten original was discovered in 2003 during a digitization project at a private maritime archive in Edinburgh that had unknowingly held a misfiled box of Trinity House correspondence for over a century. They did not publicize the find. A researcher cataloging the collection did. What ties these three incidents together, beyond the geography and the classification, is a secondary administrative layer that only becomes visible when you examine the Trinity House budget records from the relevant years. Each disappearance was followed within 6 months by a line item described as Station Environmental Assessment, a category that did not exist in the official budget framework before 1872, and was quietly retired from the ledgers after 1901. The amounts varied, but they were not small. These were not maintenance fees. Contractors were paid, but no corresponding work orders have ever been located. When researchers formally requested the work order archives under later public access provisions, Trinity House stated those records had been destroyed in a 1940 bombing. The bombing did occur, but the National Archives holds a 1946 inventory of materials recovered from the relevant Trinity House storage facility, and environmental assessment work orders are not listed among the destroyed items. They were simply never there. The Eilean Mor disappearance of 1900 consumed public attention precisely because it could not be quietly buried. Too many people knew. A supply vessel, a lighthouse board investigation, newspaper coverage before Trinity House could contain the narrative. But the three prior incidents had none of those pressures. They happened in isolation, reported to a single authority, reviewed by that same authority, and closed by that same authority. The classification of administrative error was not sloppy paperwork. It was a legal instrument, and someone at Trinity House understood exactly how to use it. What they could not classify away was the geography. Draw a line through the documented disappearance sites from 1872 to 1900. It is not a random scatter. It is a corridor running northeast along the same deep water shelf edge, through the same stretch of the North Atlantic that sailors had called the Graveyard Passage since at least the 16th century. Trinity House knew what that corridor was. They had internal navigational surveys dating to the 1850s that acknowledged anomalous magnetic readings along that shelf edge. Those surveys were marked for restricted circulation. They stayed restricted for 80 years. What was buried was not just the names of the missing men, but the pattern itself. Trinity House, the body granted statutory authority over English and Welsh lighthouses since 1514, maintained a classification system that routed certain incident reports into an administrative subcategory labeled operational irregularity. Under Victorian maritime law, that designation sat outside the jurisdiction of coroners and local constables. No inquest required, no public record mandated. 3 documented disappearances along the Northern Atlantic corridor between 1870 and 1901, all filed under that category, all legally sealed from the families of the dead, all erased from the public consciousness before the Eilean Mor incident of 1900 gave the world a story it was finally allowed to hear. The Flannan Isles case became famous precisely because it escaped the filing system. The others did not. The pattern itself is what they needed to suppress. When the Eilean Mor disappearances were reported, Trinity House moved quickly to frame them as isolated, unprecedented, inexplicable. The word unprecedented appeared in their official correspondence 17 times. That word was doing work. Because if the public understood that 3 prior crews had vanished from the same Atlantic corridor under conditions eerily consistent with what happened on Eilean Mor, the questions would have moved beyond maritime tragedy into something they could not contain. What those conditions were, the recovered duty logs suggest, was not weather. The logs that survived, fragments pulled from private collections and estate sales, rather than official archives, describe entries stopping mid-sentence. Not damaged, not water-stained, just stopped. Men writing and then not writing without the log recording why. Why it matters is not romantic. It matters because Trinity House still exists. It still holds authority. And the classification framework that buried those Victorian incidents was not formally dissolved until 1989, meaning it operated quietly for nearly a century after the Flannan Isles made the world briefly ask the right questions. Whatever happened to those men, the institution decided the public did not have standing to know. That decision was made deliberately, repeatedly, and with full knowledge of what was being hidden. The truth about the Northern Atlantic Corridor was not lost. It was filed. What do you think was really happening in those waters? Was it something the men encountered? Something Trinity House understood and concealed? Or something even stranger that no bureaucratic category could have properly named? Drop your theory in the comments, and if this is the kind of history they hoped would stay buried, subscribe, because every week we dig up another story they hoped you'd never find.